Hello, and welcome to our journey toward a simpler, more sustainable life. And we're here to talk today about gardening. Now, this may seem like a particularly funny time of year to be talking about gardening, but for those of you who have been doing much gardening for very long, you'll know that some of the most fun you'll have with gardening is planting, and this is the time of year to do some planting. This is December 23rd, and as you can see, we've got snow on the ground. I think there's a pretty good chance we're going to have a white Christmas. You'll also notice that it's sunny. And even though we are just past the shortest day of the year, this property gets an amazing amount of sun. And the sun's very low in the sky, but it's right above the ridge that's behind the camera. And so a remarkable amount of sun, even though it's a time of year when sun is the lowest in the sky. And we've got some exciting plans for our garden. Behind me to your right here is our vegetable garden that we've had for probably about 10 or 12 years now. It's 30 feet by 30 feet, so 900 square feet. It's amazingly productive. We get a huge percentage of our food from the garden here. We have 4 raised beds in it, plus we have some plants that are planted right directly into the ground as well. And I'm not even going to try to list all the different plants we typically have because I'll undoubtedly miss those, and my wife Nancy's really the one that handles those sorts of decisions anyway. I can tell you that probably the most prolific plant that we have is kale. We have Russian kale that keeps volunteering, and I harvested some about a month ago. I had to break off the frozen snow to get to it, but it was delicious and fresh and nutritious. And at the other end of the season, by April, we can be harvesting kale again. So it's a perfect plant for us. We love it. It tastes great. The Russian kale in particular is really tasty, and it just grows almost all year long. So this is, again, a very productive garden, but we're going to expand it. And we're going to expand it mostly because we're curious. We have some ideas, we've learned some things, and we want to try them out. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually double the size of the garden. We're going to make it go off to your left there, and we're going to add another 30 by 30 feet, although the technique we're going to employ is quite a bit different. And we've been reading a lot about permaculture and about food forests, and that's what we're going to try doing. There's a lot of different things about the concept of a food forest that interests us. One of them is that two of them actually are that it's supposed to be much easier to manage a food forest type garden, and it's supposed to be more productive. And those are pretty powerful ideas to convince us to give it a try. More than anything, it's an adventure. It's something we want to try out. Eventually, if it works, what we'll do is we'll take down the fence that will temporarily divide the two segments of the garden and make the whole thing a food forest. The concept of a food forest we're still learning about, but one of the things that fascinates me is that its aim is to replicate nature. The information that I understand about food forests is that if you walk in the woods, you'll notice that everything looks pretty healthy, and there's a diversity of plants. Nobody weeds it and nobody waters it, yet it does really well. And so what can we learn from that forest that we can apply to our garden? Well, it turns out there's lots that we can learn about gardening when we go for a walk in the woods. And we notice, for instance, that there's lots of very, very tall trees creating a very high canopy, and then there's some shorter trees that are at a lower altitude but still do quite well in the forest. And then there's bushes, and then there's plants that creep along the ground, and then there's plants that produce roots, and then there's vines that climb up on the rocks or on the trees, and all of those are things that we can do in a food forest. What we've been learning about food forests is there's typically 7 potential layers in a food forest, and we're hoping to have most of those in ours. One of those is the canopy, and then there's also the subcanopy, and that comes from trees. And we've ordered 5 trees for delivery this coming spring. 3 of them are hazelnut trees, and 2 of them are Asian pears. Those are trees that we are both interested in, and we have reason to believe that they'll do well here. And you are now looking generally in a southerly direction, and so we'll be planting the trees on the north side of the garden, so they shouldn't be creating undue shade for most of the plants in the existing vegetable garden. That being said, there are lots of plants that like a little bit of shade, and it's the synergy of the different plants living together that really make a food forest so productive. And so we're planting a whole host of different plants that will be underneath those nut and fruit trees, and they will be in the form of bushes and herbs and creeping plants and root plants and vines. All of those we're going to try to employ. One plant that we've already discovered does particularly well in that kind of a soil layer, if you will, with the wood chips is strawberries. They just do fabulously well. And they send out their little runners and they plant themselves into that, and very, very productive with strawberries. That's an example of a creeping plant that we'll have in our food forest. But the list on our wish list for what kind of plants we wanted is very long, and we'll have to see which ones we get in, particularly the first year. So this is definitely going to be an experiment for us. Year one, we know we're not going to get a whole lot of food out of it, but we're excited to give it a try. A lot of work's going to be going into building the fence. Living here, we've got lots of things that we need to protect our garden from. And so we've learned a lot over the years, and it becomes a veritable fortress to keep out people, and not people, but our friendly furry friends, so that we can enjoy the food as much as possible. The fence is a really good idea because living here, there's lots of animals who would like to share in our crops, and we don't mind sharing voluntarily, but when they come in uninvited, that's not such a good thing. And so we need to have a fence that does a good job of protecting what we've got. So we'll keep you posted. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. Really would appreciate it if you would like this video, perhaps subscribe to it and share it with your friends. Thank you again for joining us in our quest to lead a simpler, more sustainable life. Thanks.